Welcome in Evan Bland of the Omaha World-Herald. Evan, I know you're covering a lot of Husker baseball. Did you by chance get to see or witness any of what Victor Wembanyama was doing against the Nuggets last night?
I saw a video on my social media feed, but I didn't click on it. So you might have to tell me. I heard it was pretty impressive.
Darn near a quadruple double, not just a triple double. He had like 28 points, 15 rebounds, I think 8 assists and 9 blocks. So he's doing Victor Wembanyama things.
Wow.
Hey,
yeah.
He's an alien. E.T. phone home, Evan. You see how big them fingers are? That wraps halfway around the ball. This is crazy. He's a freaking anomaly doing stuff like that in his rookie year. Wait till just think if he had a body like your boy.
Tim Duncan?
The illustrious big fundamentals Tim Duncan. What if he had that? Oh my gosh. There'd be nothing you could do with him.
Well, now you're getting me all excited for Spurs games, and it's been a few years here. So, what is he, 19, something like that?
Mm-hmm.
He's going to grow. He's going to grow into his body, and I think the Spurs have the third or fourth worst record in the NBA right now. So they're building this thing. Kind of reminds me of the Thunder from a decade ago when they had a few bad seasons. They stockpiled draft capital, and now if you hit on guys, that thing can turn around pretty quick. So they've been competitive. They got the franchise cornerstone, another round or two of high picks, and maybe people down in San Antonio will be partying like it's the mid-2000s again.
They'd be partying like Prince, 1999, when they won the lockout championship.
Yeah, beat the 8-seed Knicks in the final. That was quite the year.
It was indeed. Well, Evan, no shame in you having missed the Victor Wembanyama show. Doing your actual job rather than rooting for your other team. Husker baseball and Creighton. Your takeaways from Nebraska's 5-3 loss that snapped the long winning streak yesterday.
I mean, it was a good game, and we kind of expected it would be. The winner was going to get a quad one victory, and honestly, it kind of reminded me of a lot of recent Nebraska Creighton games, not just in the outcome, which Creighton has kind of handled that bit of the rivalry in recent years, but also I'm always struck by how the teams approach it differently. I mean, Creighton will go into that game and they make no bones about the fact that it's a huge game for them and that it's different. The crowd's different. The intensity is different, and they typically rise to the occasion. Now, Nebraska has usually been of the mind that it's a marathon, not a sprint. You treat every game the same. And there was a little bit of an acknowledgement maybe that those in-state games do mean something, but just the emotion, I think, certainly favored what Creighton had going on. And then it was just about the fast start. I mean, both teams, quite honestly, had some pretty good pitching performances. Nebraska in the back half of their game, Creighton pretty much throughout. And so it was a matter of who took that early lead. And, Creighton gets the quick home run and another 2-run single, and it just kind of felt like it was going to be an uphill battle for Nebraska. Now, I think offensively, the Huskers probably regressed a little bit, struck out 14 times, that tied a season high. And then, you had, I think it was 9 pitchers in the game, and not all of them were spotless. So they just didn't have a ton of margin for error there. But ultimately, I think it's one of those games, if you're Nebraska, that you lose, that kind of chaps you from a pride standpoint, but really not so much an RPI or postseason resume standpoint. I mean, Creighton, they're 21-4 now. They're a top 40 RPI team. That's not going to ding you too much, especially on the road. So as much as people maybe bemoan another Creighton loss and a midweek setback, it really doesn't do all that much to change the trajectory that team's on.
You mentioned the offense and the 14 strikeouts. Do you credit most of that to good pitching from Creighton or a breakdown in approach from Nebraska in the batter's box?
Probably more the Creighton performance than what Nebraska was doing. I mean, they put some of their highest leverage relievers in there, especially late in the game. The guy that they started with, Malachi Vitak, he was someone who's had success against Nebraska before. So I think they knew what they were doing in terms of the arms that they put out there. But, I think we talked to Caden Brumbaugh after the game, the second baseman, DH, and he said, maybe there's a little bit of pressing. Maybe there was a little bit of getting away from their approach. Like they always say, hunt the fastball. So you look fastball, and then that allows you then to adjust to the off-speed pitches. And I think Nebraska would tell you that in this particular night, maybe they didn't adjust to some of the off-speed stuff as well as they have.
You mentioned, too, the fact this is maybe a pride loss more so than a damaging loss. You tweeted something out a couple hours ago, hour and a half ago now. One outlet nationally saying Nebraska's hosting a regional, which is in and of itself notable. I mean, 15 overall national seed. They'd be matched up with number 2, I think, on the other end, should they win their regional. But the 2 and 3 seeds in that regional, LSU and Creighton. Like, I don't know which is more astounding. I mean, Nebraska hosting a regional, or you get, national power defending national champ LSU, and then in-state rival Creighton coming down the road. Which aspect of that stood out to you more, the Nebraska hosting or the opponents?
Probably, I suppose you'd have to say the hosting, just because if you're, this was D1 baseball. If they had Nebraska 24, then, only 16 teams end up hosting. So that would tell you that they would feel like that's a team that will continue to rise and maybe make a run in the Big Ten. So I think that would be notable. And just the fact that the Big Ten, since Nebraska's been there, has only had like 5 teams host a regional during that time. So it's not something that happens every year or even really every other year. So probably it would be that vote of confidence in Nebraska to host. But man, how about the other end of that thing too? I mean, as someone replied to me, the tailgating would be spectacular. LSU fans are used to coming up to Nebraska for the College World Series. They come up to the CWS even when their team's not there by the thousands. I can't imagine what that parking lot at Haymarket Park would be like with purple and gold. And then you have Creighton backers come down as well. And not to mention just the excitement from Nebraska fans if they were able to host for the first time since 2008. So, it's one of those things that, like, I suppose as fans and media, we can kind of think about and wonder what that would be. Obviously, if you're the team and the coaches, that's the furthest thing from your mind as you're getting ready for Big Ten play in Ohio State this weekend. But I think it's just kind of a reminder that, man, when Nebraska baseball is going well, the month of May and early June is a ton of fun. And there's been a whole generation that hasn't experienced Haymarket Park in June with playoff baseball. And it'd be a really cool thing. It'd be quite the spectacle. Obviously, a lot's got to happen for that to materialize, but just the fact that they're in that discussion right now, I think has a lot of people excited.
Similar tree, different branch here. I saw a different projection that had Nebraska going down to, drumroll, Stillwater again. And Evan, I don't want to throw my Nebraska conspiracy tinfoil hat on too much, but I am starting to wonder if it's, a capital T thing for selection committees with Nebraska and storylines. We know about both basketball teams playing Texas A&M in the Trev Alberts Bowls, but Nebraska went down to Stillwater, in one of its last regional appearances, went down to Arkansas in its most recent appearance, and there are plenty of storylines there. Is it a thing with Nebraska and storylines from the committees, or am I just being conspiratorial?
I mean, I've talked to some of those selection committee folks before, and they're so in the weeds on their own things that, like, it would shock me if they gave Nebraska a second thought. I mean, when they went in 21, and that was the year after the COVID year, and they had to award regional hosts before the end of the season, the fact that Nebraska wasn't in that discussion really didn't even come up that much for the committee. I think that's not necessarily even a reflection on Nebraska, but more the Big Ten and its place in college baseball. I mean, it's kind of the middle class, maybe upper middle class in that sport. Whereas, of course, you're talking basketball, football. It's right at the top or right near the top. So, no, I don't think the committee gives Nebraska a whole lot of thought unless the Huskers sort of force the issue. And when you're 20-6, you're starting to force the issue a little bit. And I think when you're looking at teams going to places like Arkansas and Oklahoma State, I mean, certainly the 21 year, there was an argument to be made in a normal circumstance that they could have hosted, maybe should have hosted. But I think generally speaking, they also try to keep 2 seeds close geographically. And that's what they were when they went to, I guess it was Oklahoma City in 2019 because Okie State's field was under construction. But, I think that's kind of the thought process there now is, okay, if that's a high 2, you still want to keep them somewhat close geographically so fans can come. And I think as us old Big 12 folks, Big 8 folks remember, it's really not all that far to drive south to Stillwater for a few days.
It's really not Stillwater, Oklahoma City, wherever. Let's switch gears to Husker football. I thought it was interesting that the official Husker football account posted the rosters for the 3 different teams that are competing against each other here in spring ball. The first team posted, the Bug Eaters team, has Dylan Raiola, not throwing to one of the transfer wide receivers. The 3 listed, Ja'Cory Barney, Demetrius Bell, and Jalen Lloyd. That's an interesting group of young guys. Do you think that was a concerted effort by the coaching staff to get Raiola with those younger guys potentially as ones that, he'll be throwing with for multiple years and maybe start that connection off, early here in spring ball?
That's a good question. I don't know, and maybe I missed this, but I don't remember how those teams were constructed. If the coaches put those together, if there was a draft of some kind. I know they have like general managers, player general managers of that team. So I'm not sure if that was an intentional thing from the coaches or if that's just how it came together. But you do look at this setup, and first of all, it's fun, right? Like, we're talking about it. The social media is pumping it out. Players are excited about it. But it just underscores further this off-season theme of competition and this idea that you're not just competing on fall Saturdays, but like if it's a lifestyle, if it's something you do every day, then those moments in the fall become a little bit more second nature. And so just this idea that Dylan Raiola has a chance to quarterback his own little team within the Nebraska program and be able to throw to some of those young receivers and to build that rapport and build that trust. Like, I mean, yeah, it's fun and they're going to want to win those reps and those practices, but it's also, it's also building that camaraderie and that experience together that is going to be beneficial in the fall. So I think that's probably the most interesting part. And we'll hear about how it all shakes out as practice goes along and all that. But I just think the more you can get guys in game settings, hitting hard, having something tangible on the line now, the smoother that transition is going to be, if you can even see it at all when it starts in the fall.
Demetrius Bell is a name that we've heard quite a bit since spring ball opened up. What have you heard from coaches or players about the redshirt freshman?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, he's one of those guys behind the scenes last year who got a lot of rave reviews. He was on the scout team. I think he got a reputation as being physical, as being fast. I know he was a target in the off season of other schools that were interested in his services, even though he didn't play, which I think tells you something about his ability and what he can do moving forward. So that's kind of where you want to get to as a program, right? Like, you want necessarily need a true freshman, no matter how skilled, to come in and carry the load on offense right away. And so he had the luxury of, adjusting to college behind the scene, getting his body in a better place. And now, by all accounts, he's ready to come out here and be a contributor pretty quickly. So we'll see how that shakes out. And Nebraska's had trouble in really the last decade with bringing along young receivers, certainly ones that they recruited and didn't get out of the portal. So, if he is able to pop pretty quickly, I think that'd be a good sign, not just for Nebraska, but how it's recruited, how it's developed, some of its skill players. And I think he's earned that reputation internally, and it'll be fun to see how quickly that may materialize here in the fall.
Listed at, I think, 6 foot 175. Is he more Billy Kemp, more Wandale Robinson? What do you think the role for him would be?
I mean, I think they like him on the outside. Just from what I've heard about his physicality, though, it probably does remind me maybe a little bit more of Wandale. Maybe not quite as thick as him, but like someone who doesn't necessarily shy away from contact, who can offer that game-breaking speed, who can be a little bit more interchangeable potentially. Obviously, you got to lock down the spot you start in before you can start moving around and being in the slot or doing different things. But that would be my early thought. We haven't seen him play in Nebraska, so it's kind of hard to say without laying eyes on him. But just from the reputation that he's got, it does kind of remind me a little bit, I suppose, of how they used Wandale a few years ago.
I also want to pick your brain on the running back spot. Looking across these three rosters that were put out, Quentin Ives, Emmett Johnson, then Ramir Johnson are the three running backs listed first. Again, it's not a depth chart, not starters necessarily. But Ramir Johnson and Dante Dowdell are on the team with Heinrich Harburg. It's Emmett Johnson with Daniel Kalin, and then Dylan Raiola and Quentin Ives. How do you break down the running back competition? Is it Emmett Johnson versus Dante Dowdell? Do you give Ramir a shot? Healthy Gabe Irvin, does he factor in? Quentin Ives got some, emergency snaps last year. How do you kind of handicap that running back competition?
Yeah, it's one of the, outside of quarterback and maybe receiver, I think it's one of the big questions that need to be answered this spring. Like, to me, it's a successful spring at running back for Nebraska if somebody becomes the guy, if somebody becomes kind of the obvious lead back. And Nebraska hasn't had that in a while. They've had some depth at that position, but you got to go back to, Amir Abdullah, Divine Ezigbo in 2018, maybe, as like the last time Nebraska had what you would call sort of that bell cow or that guy that you can lean on consistently in those spots. And so who that is exactly, I think remains to be seen. Maybe it's Dowdell, who was a 4-star recruit, went to Oregon and sort of inexplicably wasn't able to redshirt there. He played 6 games. And so he's got a chip on his shoulder, I think, to show that his recruiting hype, what he was in high school, can translate to college. Irvin is going to be out at least partially in the spring, maybe the entire spring. So it's going to be hard to evaluate him. He's suddenly a guy who's struggled to stay healthy in his Nebraska career, usually through no fault of his own, but it's just kind of broken that way for him. Ramir Johnson has been around the program for a long time. So I think maybe his role is a little bit more supplemental, just in terms of his ability to be a receiver and to kind of move around in different spots. Ives is someone, again, we haven't seen play, but coaches have consistently been really excited about what his potential is too. And then Emmett Johnson, this is a big spring for him. I mean, he came on, like you mentioned, in sort of pinch hitting duty late because of injuries last year, but he was an accomplished recruit out of the state of Minnesota, and is somebody that could potentially be that guy too. So maybe it comes down to who had a better off season, who's bigger, faster, stronger. But man, you just love it if somebody kind of became that no doubt guy moving forward that Nebraska could rely on this season and beyond.
Then on the other side of the ball, yesterday we heard from defensive coordinator Tony White. Nash Hutmacher's comments got a lot of run. Cam Lenhart was at the podium. But Terrence Knighton, right, the coach for those two players, what did you take away from Coach Knighton's availability and what he said about his room?
He seemed like a guy who was pretty happy with the guys that he had in there. I mean, and who wouldn't be? Like, when you're talking about needing some depth at that spot, and you can start with Nash, Hutmacher, or Ty Robinson, but you can go down the list and say, hey, here's Cam Lenhart year 2. Okay, how good's he going to be? Even in a year, Prince Will, Uman Mielen down the road, what's he going to look like? Riley Van Poppel, who got a handful of snaps and some meaningful ones last season. I think of that stuff that he had at Illinois that made a big difference. So it's a group that's in really good shape right now. I mean, kind of who the starters are. They look the part, but you also kind of can see, okay, this is what it'll look like in a year or even 2 years down the road. James Williams is another guy, the sack man who came on late last season. He redshirted. Now he's got another year in the program. So what's next for him? Knighton was easy with the smiles. I think he kind of understands these guys have put in some work. They benefited from some returning talent that maybe they didn't necessarily know that they'd get back in guys like Robinson and Hutmacher. So, I think they embraced the idea that if this defense is going to be as good as they expect it to be next year, then it has to start up front. It has to start with those guys being able to stop the run, pressure the quarterback. They did that certainly pretty well at times last year, but they feel like there's even another level that they can reach in 2024.
It's Evan Bland of the Omaha World-Herald with us here on our Allo VIP line. Check out all his work at omaha.com. Give him a follow on Twitter. Evan, as always, appreciate the time. Have a good rest of your week. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys. See ya.